the end, I broke both arms, broke my ulna in one, my radius in the other. I fractured C1 and T1 in my neck and my back. I broke like 3 ribs, fractured my pelvis in 4 spots. Had some open wounds because I had an ice axe that like went through my calf.
Episode 363, professional rock climber and paragliding hobbyist Matt Segal joins us. You're listening to the Adventure Sports Podcast, brought to you by 180 Tech. We talk with adventurers from around the globe to bring you the inspiration and motivation you need to get started in the outdoors or to keep you moving if you're already there. Now here's your host, Kurt Linville.
Hey friends, Kurt here. Thank you again for listening to the Adventure Sports Podcast today. I've got a cool guy with us today, Matt Segal. Matt is the founder of Alpine Start Foods, which is, they have several products. Let him talk about that. But coffee, think coffee, great coffee. And not only coffee, but coffee that is made for the outdoors and adventure sports. But we'll get back to that. We're talking today about trad climbing. And Matt's biggest claim to fame is that he's a professional climber, been sponsored with North Face for 10 years. And he's been all over the world, not just doing climbing, but setting new 514 routes. Matt is the guy. So I'm excited to talk about not just climbing, but kind of the elite side of trad climbing. Matt, welcome to the program.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, man, it's our pleasure. I want to get the backstory. You mentioned just now before we hit record that you grew up in Florida. So I was kind of laughing because you don't climb outside in Florida unless you're climbing a tree, right?
That's very true. So yeah, I grew up in Florida. And my family had a place in North Carolina. So I went to camp in North Carolina in the summer times and kind of first tried climbing in North Carolina when I was really young. And when I was about 13, I came home to Miami and there was a climbing gym had opened. So I started going to the climbing gym. And basically, kind of from that first moment that I stepped in the climbing gym, I was pretty hooked and spent like most of my time at the climbing gym. And obviously, growing up in Miami and only climbing in the gym, I didn't get the opportunity to climb outside a ton. So I kind of excelled at indoor climbing and indoor climbing competitions for, the first 5 to 8 years of my climbing life. But eventually, those competitions kind of brought me all over the United States and eventually all over the world. And every time I'd go on a trip for a competition, I'd, sneak in a couple days climbing outside and truly fell in love with just rock climbing.
I want to get back to the transition from the gym to climbing outside because I think that that's really interesting to me anyway. Hopefully the listeners want to hear more about that. But I also wanted to ask you, trad climbing stands for traditional climbing. But for the listeners who don't know what that means, what's the difference? I mean, what made something traditional climbing?
That's an interesting subject, just because there's many different opinions on that. But typically, like the general description of traditional climbing is when you're placing your own gear as protection. So sport climbing would be when there's bolts that somebody went in before you and placed the bolts, and you would just clip protection to the bolts. So traditional climbing is when you basically place your own protection.
And, obviously these days we have nuts and hexes and cams and all that kind of stuff that were used for protection. But back in the old days, people are hammering pitons into rock and stuff like that. Would that old piton hammering stuff be trad climbing, or is that too old?
Yeah, I mean, nowadays people don't typically do that sort of like hammer pitons in as much as they used to, just because the modern kind of gear is so good. But that's kind of where I was getting with, traditional climbing. There's certain routes that are out there, Baccarian being one of them that, I haven't had the opportunity to climb yet, but it's a route that is protected by bolts, but it could hardly be called a sport climb, because of how spaced the bolts are and how it was established. And it's much more of an adventure than a sport climb, but you're not placing your own gear. So it's this gray area of kind of adventure climbing.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the reasons I asked, because I've asked that question before, and you kind of get slightly different answers, because I think there's kind of a fuzzy gray area in there, right?
Yeah, there's definitely a fuzzy gray area in there, and I've climbed a fair bit of routes too that are mixed. So there might be one bolt on it, but it's mostly gear, or it might be mostly bolts but a couple pieces of gear. It's kind of that gray area of what is it?
Yeah, right.
And a friend of mine kind of was joking around because we're kind of jumping around here, but later on when I began establishing some hard traditional climbs, I established them in a way where, sometimes I would work the moves before I would lead them on top rope and figure out where all the gear was. And oftentimes they were dangerous. So, that's why there was this rehearsing going on. And some people were like, that's not trad climbing. Trad climbing has to be going from the ground up. They're just like, you're being a gear protected sport climber, which is it's kind of funny and valid in some ways. I think, trad climbing, when you say trad climbing, it implies a sense of adventure, which is different from sport climbing in some ways. So that's kind of how I like to view it is, that sense of adventure, that sense of climbing into the unknown.
Interesting. That's a neat distinction. So back to the gym. Most of that's going to be sport climbing, but there are people that are at least clipping into stuff on their way up. Would you call any of that trad if you're in the gym?
No, in the gym is just gym climbing and sport climbing. I mean, nowadays we're seeing so many climbing gyms pop up around the world, really, especially in the United States. I think you're kind of getting a whole other set of climbing, and that's indoor climbing, which is great. It's it's kind of always been a really good training tool for me, but it's also filling a void in the fitness world for some people that just don't want to go to a regular gym, and they go to the climbing gym, and they might not ever climb outside, and that's fine, and that's great, and they go to the gym and enjoy themselves. So it's almost like something totally different.
Yeah. We had Chris Werner on the show talking about K2. We had him on once before talking about other climbs, but he's the owner of Earth Treks climbing gyms across the United States. And I mentioned that for the listeners. If you want to hear more about climbing in the gym and how that can replace your traditional gym, and it's a lot more fun. That's one hint. But go back and listen to those episodes because they're really, really good and pretty exhaustive about, sport climbing in the gym. So, but I want to hear about the transition, Matt. When you started going outside from the gym, then I know that things had to be completely different. Was it a whole new world for you, or did it feel fairly natural?
Yeah, for me, it was definitely a whole new world. I was used to climbing super high level in the gym, and then would go climbing outside and get shut down like 2 number grades below that. And that was just the situation. I'd go compete at a climbing competition and would do really well, would maybe win, and the people that I beat would be climbing so much harder than me on rock, and it just took a lot of humbleness and a lot of kind of patience to start climbing outside and kind of accept that I wasn't going to excel at it right away. And I probably didn't really excel at climbing outside until I graduated high school and left Miami, because it's hard to really get good at something when you just do it on like the weekends, or not even the weekends, just like a couple times a year. So when I graduated high school, I went to Europe for a couple months and competed in World Cups, and then moved straight here to Colorado, and started kind of focusing more on bouldering and sport climbing for the first couple years that I was here.
And so I'm sure that Eldorado Canyon's a big one for you.
Yes, that wasn't until a little bit later. So basically I moved to Colorado in 2002, and for the first couple of years I was like pretty devoted to bouldering and sport climbing. So I'd spend a lot of time up in Rocky Mountain National Park and a little bit more time in Boulder Canyon, sport climbing and bouldering. And then eventually I because I was still really focusing on the competitions. When you're doing competitions, you have to climb inside a lot, and it doesn't really kind of allow you the freedom to climb outside a ton. There's a lot of training involved, and honestly, it's just climbing inside has its own like repertoire of movement and stuff like that. So you need to be doing that more. And I was focusing on that. And basically, I think it was in 2005, I had a really good competition year. I won ABS Nationals that year, but was kind of just not really satisfied with doing the comps. I was getting really bored of it. And one of my friends from the competitions introduced me to Eric Caria, who had just moved to Colorado at the time. And he was one of the more influential traditional climbers in kind of the Front Range as well as around the Moab area. And basically from there, I started trad climbing with him a ton. And I guess he kind of took me under his wing. And all of a sudden, with the single pitch traditional climbing, it was able to it was new and it was exciting, if that makes sense. It was like the competitions were super physical and mental because, you're put on the spot and it's like you have time to perform. That's how I felt about traditional climbing, is it really pushed me mentally and physically.
Nice. Well, in a gym, you can see the holds because they're bolted to a wall, and they're color-coded so you know what's on route and what's off route. And they're all graded, based on whoever's setting the routes, that person's opinion on what the grading's supposed to be. You go outside, the holds are invisible. You have to learn to read the rock, right?
Totally, yeah.
And the lighting changes that, too. And what was that like?
That was definitely a challenge. I feel like, kind of skipping around here a little bit, but, when I did those early years of competition climbing when I was in Colorado, I was climbing outside a fair bit. So I was getting better at climbing outside before I started trad climbing, focusing on trad climbing. Like I went through and climbed a bunch of really hard boulder problems and really hard sport climbs before I'd started really focusing on trad climbing. So I feel like I had that transition down. But what was a little bit harder was kind of the danger element to traditional climbing and the element of like patience of taking your time to place your own gear and kind of risk management.
Yeah, definitely. That's different. No doubt about it. Wow. Well, let's rewind just a little bit. I mean, you've put your heart and soul into climbing. It's been your life. If someone's never climbed before and they're like, well, dude, why should I do that? What would you tell them?
That's interesting. Yeah. I mean, I think for me, it's, I guess a little before I answer that, like I've, been spending a lot of time over the last couple of years doing other activities besides climbing, like skiing and paragliding. But climbing has always offered to me this ability to push myself mentally and physically at the same time. That it's a lot of these activities you can't do. And I find it to be a super contemplative activity as well, because there's a lot of time. So it's not just like it's not like skiing where everything happens pretty fast. Like things happen kind of slow in climbing. So I think it's a really good balance of having time to enjoy yourself in these beautiful places outdoors, and be kind of being able to push yourself mentally and physically.
Yeah, I've talked to a lot of climbers and people from all adventure sports. It doesn't have to be climbing, but they all talk about, when you're in the groove, when you're in the moment, when you're present in the now, and they talk about how climbing helps them to get there and how important it is to be successful, to be in that frame of mind. Is that a big deal with you? Is that part of your modus operandi, so to speak?
Oh, totally. I mean, I think with climbing, it's definitely like you have these moments where everything clicks and everything comes together, which is kind of unlike any other activity I've ever experienced.
Do you get that same sort of a feeling, and maybe in a slightly different way, but out of skiing or paragliding?
I would say skiing more so than paragliding, but I'm not a good enough skier to experience that yet. it is the truth. I grew up in Florida. Paragliding is its own sense of adventure because it's not physical at all. Like you're basically sitting down. We all joke it's like the most badass you could be sitting down. And I mean, yeah, you're literally kind of lying down. And but skiing is a little bit more similar because there is a physical component to it. It is physically challenging, as well as mentally challenging. But again, I am not, I don't have nearly as much time skiing as I do climbing. So I feel like I recently was in California and I had like a couple turns that I was like, whoa, okay, that was different. Like I was in some different, everything was perfect. I was in kind of at squaw in bounds even, and the snow was like just dumped like 3 feet, and it was like one of those super dreamy days, and I was like, okay, like we're going somewhere.
That's fun.
But literally, that was like 1/32nd instance, so I don't I could see skiing getting to a point like that, but with climbing, it's happens way more often.
Right. Well, it's fun too skiing is fairly new to you, right? And It's been a long time since climbing was new to you. Is it fun to do something new?
And I think that's why it's why I first really dove into paragliding, and I got into a paragliding accident about 8 months ago, which we could get into. But it happened with paragliding where I was like really into it, and it's kind of happening with skiing. Kind of happened with skiing both before, both of them actually around the same time, skiing and paragliding. And I think that is just because, I had spent, like, I've been climbing for almost 20 years, and it's even though it's still by one true love, I like to say, it's it gets a little stale sometimes, and it's good to kind of mix it up with new types of adventure. And for me, it's that's kind of the older I've gotten, the more it's been about like going on adventures, and they're all three of those activities are kind of tools for spending time in the mountains. And I think the older I get, the more I realize that the importance isn't necessarily on any of those three activities, but it's more of like spending time in the mountains. And I think it's like in the future, it'd be cool to be at a competent level with all these activities where you're like, okay, like today's a day for flying, I'm going to go flying. Today's a day for skiing, I'm going to go skiing. And it's not, not allowing the conditions of the mountains to dictate your time in the mountains.
Right. Yeah, that's cool. I've talked to a lot of people who they like to combine sports. For instance, they'll whitewater kayak one day and ski the next, which means you're going to kayak in the cold, but it's fun to do that.
I'm actually doing that in a month.
Right on.
We're not kayaking, we'll be rafting, but we're floating the Tatanshini River in Alaska, and going to go ski mountaineering off of the Tatanshini.
Awesome. That's going to be fun. So I assume that's with AT gear, right? Have you done ski mountaineering before?
Yeah, I've done a bunch of ski touring before, a little bit of ski mountaineering, but that's definitely a new thing for me. So
nice.
Yeah.
As I'm sure you know from listening to the Adventure Sports Podcast, some of the safest and best snow conditions for backcountry skiing of the whole year happen in the springtime. And Bentgate has the gear you need. Come check out the latest in alpine touring, telemark, NTN, and splitboarding gear. They have brands like Black Crows, DPS, Dynafit, G3, Icelantic, K2, Technica Blizzard, Arc'teryx, Mammoth, Solomon, Volley, Neversummer, Jones, and BCA. And you do need to be safe out there. Bentgate has the latest in avalanche safety gear. They have beacons, airbags, shovels, and probes, and they're ready to help you educate yourself on snow safety. They also rent out gear, so you can get your skis and your boots there, as well as your avalanche safety equipment. What's more, they also have free demo ski days at local resorts, so you can try out the latest gear. Now, how much fun does that sound? So swing by Bentgate in Golden, Colorado, or go to bentgate.com to find your new gear, as well as to get updates on all of their events. Well, I tell you what, you're the perfect example of someone who understands that it's really about getting out there. It's not so much what you're doing as it is that you're doing something, you know?
Totally. Yeah.
And I love that. And I like your perspective about, my old first love is, but I do this new stuff too. And I think that's cool.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk a little bit. I'm trying to decide whether we should go to your paragliding accident, because that was a nice teaser. I want to hear that, but I wanted to hear more about some of your climbing escapades. You've done some amazing stuff out there. Let's get the paragliding one out of the way. We'll come back. I want to hear about these 514 routes, but what happened? you got us all ready to hear the story. So
I guess this was July 16th, actually. I was actually in the middle of training to go on an expedition to Nepal. I was supposed to go in October to try to climb and fly Manaslu, which is the 8,000 meter peak in Nepal. And, our objective was to basically try to climb the mountain and then fly our paragliders just below the summit. So I was doing a lot of kind of climbing and flying as preparation, as well as doing a lot of training, a lot of cardio training, and kind of just general alpine climbing training during that time. And basically was on a little road trip kind of from Wyoming to California, and had summited Mount Tom, which is just outside of Bishop, and was with a crew of people, about 6 of us, I think. And 4 people basically launched successfully. And there were 2 of us left up there, and I was going to launch, and basically a really strong cycle of wind came through and picked me up. And I didn't have time to gain control of my wing. And it kind of spun me around and slammed me into the talus field.
Oh.
So that was at about 9:30 in the morning, and I was lying there. Fortunately, somebody was there, called a rescue. They were able to land. They were able to drop somebody off, but they weren't able to pick me up for another 8 hours. So I kind of laid there for 8 hours without any pain meds. It was pretty rugged. In the end, I broke both arms, broke my ulna in one, my radius in the other. I fractured C1 and T1 in my neck and my back. I broke like 3 ribs, fractured my pelvis in 4 spots. Had some open wounds because I had an ice axe that like went through my calf. And I generally got like pretty screwed up.
Man, you were worked. That is horrible.
I was worked, and they flew me to Bishop Hospital, and they like took a look at me and was like, "Yeah, you need to go to Reno." So then I got air flighted to Reno, where I was in the ICU for about 4 or 5 days, and then went to the regular hospital for like 5 days. And basically from the beginning, they're like, okay, like you're pretty messed up, but you're going to be fine. You have to wear a neck brace. They did surgery on my arms. The worst of all the breaks were my arms. So everything else was kind of like minor fractures. So I didn't need casts or surgery on anything besides both arms, which as a climber, that was pretty heinous to have both arms broken. And basically for the next month after that, next about 6 weeks, I could kind of barely walk, but I could walk a little bit. And I couldn't really lift up anything more than a pound. So a cup of coffee. So I was in a pretty dark place. Had, to say the least. Had some great friends and family take care of me, which is kind of crucial.
Man. So I'm glad that you shared that story. It leads me to another question, and that is, you're just telling us about all these adventure sports that you're continuing to do. And after an accident like that, I think some people might say, I'm going to hang it up.
Yeah, interestingly enough, I haven't gotten back on my paraglider yet. I was planning to this spring, and I kind of, my whole thing with it was it all started with climbing for me, and I kind of wanted to allow myself to get into climbing shape.
Right.
Get back to climbing 514 actually is what it was before I started flying my paraglider again. And I kind of got sidetracked with skiing this winter. So I kind of basically just, did a trip to Spain, climbed a couple 513s earlier in the winter, and it was awesome. And I haven't spent the time focusing on climbing that I would need to be able to get back to climbing 514 because of all the skiing. So I'm just kind of taking it one step at a time here. But yeah, I think my level of, I definitely feel like a little bit more, I don't know if I feel a little bit more timid. I think time will tell, to be honest, because I'm definitely timid on my skis, but that's also just because I'm kind of just learning how to do a lot of stuff.
Yeah,
with
it's a
skiing.
newer sport.
Skiing's so new that I'm not like, but I'm probably maybe more timid with it than I would be if I hadn't like gotten into a really bad accident.
Well, sometimes it takes something like that not to stop us, but to remind us to manage our risk.
Yeah, totally. And I think ultimately, like, my accident occurred because I was just spreading myself too thin. I was trying to progress a little too quickly with paragliding. I was trying to do too much at once. Is the biggest thing for me.
Yeah.
I was like training to try to climb an 8,000 meter peak without oxygen. I was like on a climbing road trip with my girlfriend at the time, like trying to climb with her, trying to do like my training, and then trying to like sneak in paragliding. So there was just way too much going on. And that's kind of why like I haven't started flying again, is because I want to be able to give it the respect that it needs. And it takes a lot of time. It's a flying sport, obviously, so it's a lot of currency.
Yeah.
So for me, I'm like, you know what? Like, let's ski right now. It's wintertime where you're just focused on skiing.
Nice. Yeah. Well, and that makes it more manageable too. But welcome back. I'm glad that you continued to get out there and do stuff. And in an accident like that, another question. Several episodes back now, I did a show on how dangerous are adventure sports, and I looked up statistics. And what was cool about it is that you can manage risk with any sport, right? And it was interesting to find out that adventure sports are generally less risky than driving a car, less risky than a lot of things that we do every day, if you're trained and you don't take unnecessary risks. But all of that said, skiing, trad climbing, paragliding, which one do you think is the riskiest?
I'm not sure. I think, I don't really know. I think, I mean, even though I was almost, almost killed paragliding, a part of me feels like skiing might be the most dangerous, but I'm not. I don't know.
Do you think of it in terms of danger, or do you think of it in terms of risk management and fun?
I think of it in terms of risk management and fun. And I think skiing, there's, elements of backcountry skiing and snowpack and stuff that I'm still just learning, there's a lot that can go wrong, a lot. Yeah. But even the trad climbing, like with all of it, there's just lots of variables. So, and when you're not an expert and you're kind of a beginner, at something, even if you're like a intermediate or advanced, or like you're somebody like me who has like a high tolerance for risk and is really good at risk management, so to say, you still don't know like all the other knowledge that experts have,
Right.
So I think yeah. I don't know. I think skiing's the most scary to me. Maybe that's a different, and to answer the question a little bit differently.
Well, what's funny about it is, of all the sports that I reviewed, skiing was the most dangerous, except for base jumping, speed suiting.
Yeah, which makes sense.
Which was nuts. And they were all relatively safe. I have to say it. I don't like to use the word safe because it's all about risk management. But compared to driving a car, they were safe. But speed suiting is not. It's dangerous. That is a dangerous sport.
And that's what I ultimately, like early on, I really wanted to base jump, and that's why I got into paragliding. because I was like, oh, that seems too dangerous. Yeah.
It may be a good call. I mean, some people would say, no, it's worth it. I love it, and I can't criticize them for that. But I found it really interesting that skiing has gained so much popularity. There's such a good chunk of the population that knows skiing, right? And we probably think of it, there's some risk involved, but we probably think of it as a fairly safe sport because so many people are doing it and we've done it so much, but the reality is, of all the sports you listed, I'm sure it's the most dangerous.
Yeah, I mean, totally. Like I was just in Squaw Valley and they had like an inbounds, avalanche, and that happened the same day in Mammoth too. These are
Wow.
these are areas that, are like some of the best skiers in the country, in the world, and it's not their fault by any means. They do, so much avalanche like work and whatnot. But snow is unpredictable,
absolutely.
And that's definitely one of those things that you're like, okay, like, yeah.
Well, let's go back to this 514 business. We got to talk about that some more.
Sure. What do you want to know?
Well, first question, I'm going to do two things. The first one is I want to talk about what a 514 means. But the second thing is I would like for you to tell us a story of setting up a 514 for the first time. The project, right, of trad climbing. And I would love to hear that in-depth story from your perspective. But first, for a long time, people said that 514 didn't even exist. It wasn't possible, right? But now they do exist. You've established routes like that, and the climbing community says, yeah.
I mean, now there's 515.
Oh, I know. It's craziness.
I mean, essentially what makes a 514 or, a route be progressively harder and harder is like a couple things. One is how difficult the moves are, which kind of equates to how small the holds are. So oftentimes would be holding on with just your fingertips per se. They're not like full hand grips. And then the other one would be like how sustained or how long it is. But you could have really short 514s too. That just means the moves are really difficult and the small holds are really small.
When did you do your first 514?
I don't know. A long time ago. Sport climbing for sure a long time ago. My first trad climb of a 514 was probably in 2006 or 7.
Okay.
I think. Yeah, it was a route called the Iron Monkey. It's in Eldorado Canyon. It was an old aid climb, an old project that people had been trying to free climb for a really long time. I think the aid name was Lycra Clad Donkey, which I thought was kind of silly. So I renamed it, which eventually I kind of got some people weren't too happy about that. It's kind of a different kind of ethic of like, oh, do you have the right to rename aid lines or not? That's a whole other subject of naming routes. But this route was in Eldorado Canyon. It's at an area called the Kloof Alcove. It's kind of like a little wall that I ended up spending a lot of time at and establishing a couple routes on this wall. But I'd gone up before to repeat this route called Superfly that was established by Skip Guerin, I believe sometime maybe in the early, I'm not sure exactly when it was established, but it hadn't seen a repeat for like 10 or 15 years.
Wow.
So it was probably established in the 90s at some point. And it was only 12 plus, but I went up and repeated this route, and that kind of put me on like the local map, so to say, of trad climbing. I was still in college, and it was definitely one of the harder, kind of scarier trad climbs in Eldo, and saw this thing to the left of it, the space, and it's really short and difficult. So it's not really long and sustained. It's like more like a boulder problem. And at the time I was spending a lot of time bouldering, so I had like a lot of fitness for that, but tried it a little bit and felt like it was really hard and couldn't really do it, and didn't really feel like I knew what I was doing, and ended kind of going around and going to Eldo and kind of repeating some other lines, other 513s and 512s, and kind of like building a basis of trad climbing. So and I was doing a lot of this with Eric Tacaria, who was kind of my climbing mentor at the time. And he kind of showed me the way a little bit of like what to do, like how to climb in Eldo. Eldo is like its own little beast of a climbing area. And eventually kind of went back to the Iron Monkey and figured out exactly how to do it and how to place the gear. And funny enough, the first day that I was like going to really try to send it, I was like, called up my friend Peter Mortimer from Sender Films. And he was like asking me about it because he had heard about it and was like, hey, yeah, you should come out and film. And the first day Peter came out was the day that I did it.
Nice. That's cool. So he got it on film then?
He got it on film. It's in, I think, one of his older films called First Descent. Yeah.
So when you finally conquered this project, I mean, you worked hard to get to the point where you could, and you just sorted out. A lot of this is planning, right? It's figuring out the right way to go about something, and then being able to have the skill and the strength to pull it off. But when you finally got to the top of that, what did it feel like?
It was like definitely one of those, like, didn't quite believe it situations. But yeah, I was obviously super excited, and it was cool to have kind of like the film crew there, and they were filming and kind of have that moment. And it's still to this date probably one of the cooler first ascents I've ever done, and hasn't really been repeated too often. I think it's only seen one true ascent, repeat ascent by Ethan Pringle, and I think one other person did it with pre-placed gear.
Well, you've done some 514s all over the place and put up these new trad routes. Name a few others for us.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff in Colorado. I did this thing called the Orangutan Overhang, it's an old aid line called the Orangutan. And that's in Independence Pass. That's like another really cool. Somebody just called me up and was like, hey, you should come check this thing out and try it. And eventually did that, and it was super fun. Kind of really love that area of Colorado. Independence Pass it's super beautiful right there by Aspen. But I think one of the more wilder kind of first ascent traditional climbs I've ever done was this thing called Air China, and I put it up it's actually in China in this place called Liming, and I don't think it got the 514 mark, but I just called it 13 plus because it was probably in that 13 kind of CD range. And there was a bolt on it. I did place a bolt on it, but it was a kind of hard decision to place the bolt. Kind of a hard decision, I don't know. But basically I was like trying this route a ton, and it's this really soft sandstone. And right before the crux, you place a bunch of cams, small cams, so pretty good placements. They're like purple TCU size pieces, if you're familiar with those cams. So they're some of the smaller cams on the market, but typically they're pretty solid. But I was worried about this cluster of gear of about 3 pieces. And I was climbing with my buddy Will Stanhope at the time, and was like, hey, Will you just go up there and check this gear out and yank on it and see if it's good? And he was like, yeah, it looks good to me. And I was like, are you sure? And had the photographer that was with us, John Dickey, go up there and be like, yank on him. And he was like, yeah, it looks sweet to me. And eventually, like, I decided to go for it from the ground and placed this cluster of 3 pieces of gear and went for it. And you kind of leave the crack and start slapping this arete, and fell. Ripped all of those 3 pieces of gear.
Oh no!
My foot clipped the arete, and I flipped upside down, and my head landed about 8 feet from the ground, upside down. So I decided to go back and put a bolt in, basically. Yeah.
I think that there's some wisdom in that. I was just getting ready to ask if you've ever pulled much of your protection like that, and I'm sure that's not the only time, but that's scary, dude.
Yeah, definitely not the only time, but that was the only time that I really wasn't expecting it. Like, I've placed gear and had it rip, but you kind of know that there's a chance. But that was one of those situations that I was like, oh, this gear's good, all my friends went up and looked at it and thought it was fine, and yeah.
Yikes. So what do you think the risk factor is when you're trad climbing of protection coming loose from the rock when you set it? I mean, how common is that?
Well, I mean, it shouldn't be that common at all. I think that's just something that the higher levels of climbing you get, the more of the possibilities of it. But you know, the biggest thing is rock quality. Obviously, the first thing is you want to check the rock quality to make sure there's good. The rock's not going to break, which is what happened to me in China. And then, you just need to take the time and really learn how to place gear, because if you're placing gear in good rock, it shouldn't pull.
I have to confess, I'm a super novice climber. I've climbed a lot of top roping over the years, but nothing even close. I mean, my best climb is probably what you were doing, 3 months into your climbing career, right?
Yeah.
But that said, I had a 50-pound rock come off the wall with me when I was free soloing once.
Oh, yikes.
And I went down, but the good news is I had water under me. And so I threw the rock so it wouldn't crush me at the bottom, but got away with it. But that's the kind of stuff that's scary to me. It's like the unexpected. You know what I mean?
Totally. Yeah.
Wild stuff. Well,
yeah.
So you have this adventure-focused lifestyle, and so many people want to have that. And everyone's like, well, I don't know how to earn the money I need to earn. I don't know how to get the time I need to do the things like that. But you've managed it, and part of that is starting this coffee company. Part of that is being sponsored. So we'll come back to Alpine Start Foods. I want to talk about how you got into that and what that's doing for you. But I also want to hear about how you got sponsored and what that did for you.
Yeah, I mean, for me, that kind of basically graduated college in 2007 and put life on a credit card. And up until that point, I, had established some hard trad climbs. I'd built a name for myself in the competition climbing world. I had some big sponsors at the time, but not fully supporting sponsors. Like I worked with La Sportiva at the time and still do. But they were a big sponsor of mine throughout college. And, they'd give me a couple $100 here and there type of situation, which allowed me to continue doing all the comps and everything. And then I basically graduated and was like, you know what? I want to be a professional climber. And kind of went on the road, did the classic kind of trad climber thing, went to Indian Creek, went to Yosemite, freed El Cap. And, in some time, somebody made an introduction with me and the North Face. And they basically, I kind of owe a lot of my climbing career to those guys, because they not only support me financially over the years, but just give me the opportunities to, go on these huge expeditions all over the world. So, I've been, on numerous expeditions to Nepal, numerous expeditions to China, Kyrgyzstan, Patagonia, and a lot of it is through, having them and all my other sponsors help out with the cost of those things. And I definitely got, I feel like super privileged and super lucky to have had the opportunity to work with a company like that, and to continue to work with a company like that. It's been over 10 years. I think this is my 11th year on the North Face global team, and because of that, I've worked with a ton of other companies. Currently and previously, I started working with Jetboil recently, and they've been, really good. And it's kind of like all of my sponsors kind of just allow me to, either go on these crazy adventures and do first ascents, or, be local and push myself in the sport as far as I can.
That's awesome. So if someone's hearing this and they're going, oh, I'd love to be sponsored, it's not that easy. What do people have to do to get sponsored? I mean, obviously, you got to be really world class.
I don't even know
right?
how to answer that question anymore, to be totally honest. And that's really, and that really is the truth. I'm not just trying to avoid the question.
Right.
I mean, things have changed so much in the professional climbing and professional adventure influencer world since I got started. I mean, I got started 10 years ago. There was no Instagram, and Facebook was tiny, now, huge contracts are getting signed. purely for Instagram purposes and Facebook social media stuff. So it's challenging to give somebody a recommendation, but I think honestly the biggest thing is do what you want to do, and if you're good at it, and I don't know, that's a really difficult thing because there is some strategy behind it, but it's also like you kind of just gotta do the adventures that you want to do for you and try to figure everything else out, because that's the most important thing. If you start doing things because you think sponsors are going to like it, that's when you're going to get yourself killed.
Yeah. I hear you, man. I heard an account a while back of a guy who was, I'm not going to name the company, but a guy who was sponsored. They had a stunt they wanted him to do. He went up and he says, "It's not happening today, guys." And they were all torqued off and tried to force him to try anyway. And I was like, whoa. Notice I named no names. But there's an element of risk and pressure that comes into it when there are expectations, you know?
Yeah, totally. And it's that's a personality thing of how you're going to manage that sort of risk. And I mean, and ultimately, as much as I love, my career as an adventure athlete and honestly don't really plan on stopping it anytime soon, I do see that it is not, it will come to an end eventually. And that's why I started Alpine Start.
Yeah, right on.
Spring is here and camping season is upon us. Visit our site at 180tac.com for your next camp stove. The 180 stove and smaller 180 flame are combustible fuel stoves, which are designed to burn the fuel that nature provides you at your campsite. There's no need to lug heavy and bulky fuel canisters along with you on the trail. The 180 flame and 180 stove are built in America and have no moving parts to fail you in the field. Check them out at www.180tack.com. Your purchase helps support the Adventure Sports Podcast.
You've managed to figure out a way to have this adventure-focused lifestyle, and for a lot of people, that's a dream life. I'm sure there are pros and cons, right? But starting Alpine Start Foods is going to open up a lot of new doors for you. So what is this? Why did you found the company, and where'd you get the inspiration?
So I guess from the beginning, the last couple of years I was focusing on climbing with my buddy Will Stanhope in Canada. We were shooting with the Real Rock Tour. It came out last year. It's a film called Boys and the Bugs. But Will and I were spending numerous summers in Canada in the Bugaboos. And we had like a pretty lush campsite. Like we weren't really super weight conscious, but I kind of had a lot of time to think about just everything. There's a lot of bad weather up there. So and then, we were starting to figure out what we were going to do when we were like sleeping on the wall, like on portaledges. Most of the time we were sleeping at a base camp, and we were kind of prepping to go for, some long pushes on the wall. And I was thinking about coffee, and it was raining one day, and I was like making coffee in my AeroPress and realized that we had Starbucks Via with us. And they were the only other kind of instant coffee company out there that was doing anything that was a decent tasting single serve instant coffee. And it kind of dawned on me that, they'd kind of opened the door for us. They were Starbucks. They were this kind of industry giant, this leader that created a product that was, a little bit better than the previous products out there. But they had gotten so big that, I didn't really like that I was purchasing Starbucks. I'd always really enjoyed coffee and kind of would always like bring up coffee from Colorado from some of my favorite roasters in Colorado, or, go to a local coffee shop in Canada and buy the beans there, So I kind of I just realized that if I could figure out a way to do this, to make the product, I could brand it to me and my people, and they would enjoy it. They would like it, and they would choose my brand over Starbucks because, Starbucks had gotten so big and they can't really relate to Starbucks that much. And, so much about the products we buy and the and the everything we consume is kind of relatability. Obviously, it needs to start with quality and a good product, but if there's a company out there that's you can relate to and it tastes good, you're going to go with them. So that's basically how I came up with the idea, and obviously the name Alpine Start kind of seemed to fit. And from the moment I came to the idea, I had a friend back in Boulder, Alex Hannafin, who had kind of worked in the natural food world for a really kind of long time. In the ways that I was kind of a child prodigy in the climbing world, she was kind of a child prodigy in the natural food world. Kind of started her first business when she was 16, and kind of worked for a lot of the big natural food businesses in Boulder, from Justin's Nut Butter to Boulder Brands and a bunch of others. So I kind of brought the idea to her, and we kind of went from there. And basically, kind of through tasting and sampling hundreds of different kinds of instant coffees, we kind of settled on one, basically, and started making it. Yeah.
Nice. Well, that had to be a real drag to have to taste that many different types of coffee, huh?
Yeah, you'd be surprised. It was there's a lot of really shitty instant coffee out there. And yeah, we work with a partner to make our product, and we're super happy with it, and things have kind of grown drastically. It started just with Alex and I about 2 years ago, and my sister actually she's in LA. She does a lot of our design work, and then we hired, our first real hire was a VP of operations, and he's kind of taken over, and now we have somewhere around 6 or 7 people on the payroll. We have a marketing manager and kind of a bookkeeper and some salespeople, and we're just getting ready now to launch 2 new products that we're super excited about. And for me, it's like I wanted to start with a black coffee, just your standard instant coffee, and then we wanted to do some different stuff. We realized that the instant coffee market is pretty big, and it's not just outdoor consumers that are buying our products for adventures and stuff. It's kind of like your everyday person who, goes to work and makes their French press at home, but wants that second cup at the office and isn't going to make like another kind of coffee. They just want to go with something quick and easy. And that's really why we started to launch our 2 new products, which is a instant coffee with a coconut creamer and a dirty chai latte.
That sounds good. Did you have to go after some venture capital and stuff to get this thing going, or were you able to bootstrap it?
We bootstrapped in the beginning, and then we did raise some money. We did like a friends and family round, and then we partnered with some VC money out of San Francisco, which they're a great partnership for us. And yeah.
So when you're starting a company these days, do you think that you really have to get that venture capital going to go, I guess, to accelerate getting a product out there? Is that the way to do it?
I think that's debatable. I think for us, it made sense to do that. But I don't think you have to. But I think if you want to move at a certain pace, then it makes life a lot easier. If that answers that question. I mean, for us, basically, I guess what I was kind of leaving out is, when we started the business, we didn't realize how much potential there was in the market for instant coffee. So Alex and I kind of decided that you were like, well, like there's a lot of potential here. We should actually take this seriously.
Right.
And that's why we chose to raise money. And, now we're in like Whole Foods and other conventional grocery stores. We're national and REI, and we wouldn't be able to have done that with just not raising any money.
Well, congratulations and good for you. Here's the question, though. As this company is growing and taking off like this, are you losing your adventure time?
I'm not actually. And And the reason for that is that I have a really good team. Alex is a kind of a great business partner, and I just have made it a priority for me to continue to live my life as an adventurer. And there's a lot of bleed over with, I'll go on adventures and shoot photos for Alpine Start and stuff like that. So for me, it's a priority. So I make sure it's a priority, but it is challenging. Mostly it's challenging at home to train for the adventures. Yeah.
How can people learn more? So I know there are going to be people that want to see you climb, and you've been filmed multiple times all over the place. So what's the best way to watch you?
A lot of the Sender films. I've shot a lot with Sender films. So you can check out some of their Real Rock tours, and I'm in there, as well as, I think that's probably the best. Yeah.
Okay. And Alpine Start Foods, if people want to try your coffee, you mentioned that you're in some conventional stores and Whole Foods and stuff like that, but what if they can't find it?
Amazon or our website, which is alpinestartfoods.com.
Right on. And if they just want to keep track with what Matt Segal is up to these days, do you do a Facebook thing or an Instagram thing?
Instagram is probably the best. Yeah. And it's just Matt Segal.
Matt Segal on Instagram.
Yeah.
Well, Matt, I love it, man. Your stories are inspirational to me. Just the idea that you lived the dream. You went out and you did what you loved to do, and you got enough of that recognition to get the sponsorships, and then you had the dedication to make it work. And now that's segued into starting a coffee company, or a food company, I should say, that is now going gangbusters as well. So congratulations, man. Well done.
Thanks. Yeah. Psyched.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you taking the time to tell us your story.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Oh, you bet. And until the next show, hey, everybody out there, make sure that you don't allow yourself to become lackadaisical. Make sure you're getting out there, doing something, chasing your dreams like Matt did. You never know what could transpire from that, So get out there and have your fun.
All right, on Monday's episode, we're going to have more airtime with Yvette Awayo. She's going to talk about her progression from sailplanes through propeller planes and on to hang gliding. Make sure you're around next week for that one. In the meantime, do us a favor and head on over to adventuresportspodcast.com and click that Become a Patron button. We need all your help to keep the show moving. Until then, enjoy your weekend, get out, and have some fun.